My wife's male boss mocked me at her company's dinner party. She could do way better than you. I shut him down in front of everyone. My wife snapped. Apologize or we're over. I smiled. I didn't say a word, but when she came home weeks later, she finally learned what done really means. 3 years into marriage, I thought Sophia and I had it all figured out. We were that couple people used as proof that adulting didn't have to look like chaos, at least from the outside. We had matching coffee mugs, a shared Spotify playlist, and a mortgage that made us feel both proud and perpetually broke. I was the calm, numbers-obsessed financial analyst, the guy who got excited over balanced spreadsheets and free donuts in the break room. Sophia was the ambitious Type A marketing executive who could make a PowerPoint presentation look like a TED Talk. She had this way of making every idea sound like the next big thing, and every meeting feel like a Super Bowl commercial pitch. Together, we were a highlight reel of fake stability. Me doing the math, her doing the magic. Sophia was magnetic, the kind of woman who could convince a vending machine to give her free snacks just by smiling at it. People at her office adored her. Her boss, Mark Davis, adored her a little too much. The man had a knack for appearing in our marriage like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Uninvited, persistent, and somehow always there at the worst moments. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's got that one overly invested manager who acts like the company's mission statement personally depends on your weekend plans. But Mark took dedicated to Olympic levels. The man texted her at 11 p.m. about font choices. Font choices? Who does that? It's urgent, Sophia, he'd say, like Helvetica was a matter of national security. And every time her phone buzzed, she'd glance at me with that quick, guilty look, the kind you give when you know you're about to say something stupid like, "It's just work." Mark just values my input, she told me once, curling her hair before bed like she was preparing for a Zoom call in her sleep. Sure, I said, and mosquitoes just value your blood. She rolled her eyes. You're paranoid. Maybe, but paranoia is just intuition that's been burned before. Still, I let it slide. In marriage, you pick your battles, and I was saving my ammo. I told myself it was harmless. After all, she came home every night. We ate dinner together, watched bad Netflix documentaries about cults, and fell asleep to the hum of the ceiling fan. That's normal, right? People text their bosses late at night all the time. Happens in every marriage, right? Then came the first office party, or as I like to call it, the night of unnecessary sequins. Sophia had been buzzing about it all week, saying things like, "It's just networking," and "everyone's bringing their spouses," which in my experience is code for, "Come watch me pretend we have the perfect marriage while we both die inside." The event was at this downtown hotel with valet parking, a red carpet entrance, and enough champagne to make HR nervous. Sophia looked stunning. Red dress, perfect curls, that confidence that made her glow like she owned the building. I, on the other hand, was the human equivalent of a neutral accessory. Just a man in a suit, smiling and shaking hands, trying not to look like he was counting how many shrimp cocktails it would take to make the night worth it. Mark spotted us the moment we walked in. He was impossible to miss. Tall, silver hair styled within an inch of its life, wearing a suit so sharp it probably had its own insurance policy. "Sophia," he called out, waving dramatically, "you look incredible." Then his eyes slid over to me. "And you must be Daniel, the famous husband, the analyst, right?" "The one and only," I said, shaking his hand. He smiled that politician smile, the kind that says, "I could charm your grandmother while foreclosing on her house." "Lucky man," he said, "she's the whole package." I smiled back, resisting the urge to say, "And you're the whole red flag, sir." Instead, I nodded like an idiot. "Yeah, I know." Mark wasn't just her boss. He was Mr. Perfect in Prada, the kind of guy who thought charisma was a skill and networking was a personality. He strutted around the ballroom like a walking motivational quote, greeting people with fake humility and a Rolex flash that could blind a small nation.
I spent most of the night standing beside Sophia, watching as he praised her campaign results like she just solved world hunger. Sophia's innovative approach to client retention is revolutionary, he said into the mic during his toast. Revolutionary. The woman found a better way to send coupons. Don't get me wrong, I was proud of her. I was also aware that Mark's admiration came with the subtle scent of cologne and midlife crisis. Every time he leaned in too close, my inner monologue started building spreadsheets of possible murder alibis. But I kept my composure. That's the thing about being the quiet guy. You learn how to weaponize patience.
When the party ended, Sophia and I walked to the car, her heels clicking against the pavement like applause. "You were quiet tonight," she said, unlocking the door. "Just taking it all in," I replied. "Great party. Your boss really knows how to make a toast." She glanced at me. "Don't start." "Start what?" "You're reading into things again." I shrugged. If by reading you mean noticing your boss stared at you like a motivational poster, then yeah, guilty. She sighed. The kind of sigh that says, "You're being dramatic, and I'm too tired for this." "It's just professional respect, Daniel." "Respect, huh? Is that what they're calling it now?" "God, you're impossible sometimes." "Only sometimes," I said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. She didn't laugh. The drive home was quiet, except for the sound of her phone buzzing. I didn't look, but I didn't have to. Mark's name glowed like a neon sign in my peripheral vision. She typed something quickly, then locked the screen. "Just confirming the event recap," she muttered. "At midnight? Deadlines, babe?" "Sure, because marketing emergencies totally happen at midnight on a Saturday." I wanted to say something, anything. But the thing about red flags is at first they look pink under romantic lighting. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself she loves you, that her loyalty isn't up for sale to a man who probably rehearses his compliments in the mirror. So I swallowed my instincts and convinced myself I was overreacting. It's easier to ignore a fire when it's still just smoke. Weeks went by. The texts continued. The late nights at the office became common enough that I started greeting her with, "Welcome home, part-time roommate." She didn't laugh at that one either. Our dinners became quieter, our smiles thinner. I caught her once smiling at her phone during breakfast, her face lighting up like a teenager reading a crush's text. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Work stuff," she said quickly, locking her phone. "You wouldn't get it." "You're right, Sophia. I wouldn't get why a grown man with a wife and a pension is sending you emojis at 7:30 a.m. Then came the night she didn't come home until 2 a.m. I'd called twice, no answer. Texted once, no reply. When she finally walked in, her makeup was faded, her perfume barely hanging on. "Sorry," she said, dropping her purse. "Last-minute presentation prep." "Presentation that needed wine?" I asked, noticing the faint smell. She froze. "It was a client dinner, with Mark." Her eyes flickered. "He's my boss." "Uh-huh. And I'm your husband." She threw up her hands. "You're being ridiculous." Maybe, but it's amazing how often ridiculous turns into right in the sequel. We didn't talk much after that. I went to work, came home, and counted how many times she smiled at her phone versus at me. Spoiler, the phone was winning. One evening, I walked past her laptop and saw a message preview pop up from Mark. It read, "Couldn't have done tonight without you. You're amazing." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence says enough. I poured myself a drink instead, sat on the couch, stared at the framed wedding photo on our mantel, the one where she's laughing and I'm looking at her like she's the only person in the world. Maybe back then she was. But right then, she looked like someone I was slowly losing to a man who thought leadership meant emotional trespassing. That's when it hit me. Maybe marriage wasn't about picking your battles. Maybe it was about realizing when you were fighting a war you didn't even sign up for. So I did what any sane man would do in a rom-com right before the plot twist. I smiled to myself, took another sip, and whispered, "Okay, Mark Davis, game on." Mark Davis wasn't your average middle-aged boss. He was the human version of a LinkedIn motivational post. Leadership, vision, integrity, all while probably sending a up text to someone who wasn't his wife. You know the type. Thinks synergy is an emotion and team spirit can be purchased with pizza. The man was tall, silver-haired, and had a wardrobe that screamed, "I pay more for my tie than you do for rent." I swear his cologne could file its own tax return. Every time he walked into a room, he made sure everyone knew it. He had that aura that said, "I own stock in confidence." And unfortunately, my wife was one of his biggest shareholders. Sophia would talk about him the way people talk about legends. "Mark's a visionary," she'd say. "He's changing the whole company culture." Sure, because nothing screams innovation like an executive who still calls female employees sweetheart. But she bought into it, all of it. She admired his drive, his focus, his mentorship. Meanwhile, I was over here trying not to gag every time his name came up in casual conversation. She'd be plating dinner and go, "Mark says presentation is everything." And I'd mutter, "So is character, but look how that's working out for him." Don't get me wrong, I wasn't insecure. I knew who I was. Stable job, decent looks for a guy who looked like a bad joke. I was the guy who filed taxes early and remembered our anniversary. I wasn't flashy, but I was steady. The kind of man you build a life with, not the kind you build an HR complaint around. But Mark, he was temptation disguised as mentorship and ego in a $3,000 suit. And Sophia, for all her intelligence, seemed blind to it. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she just liked the attention that came wrapped in corporate approval and designer cufflinks. The first time I met him outside that office party was at this stupid company brunch. Sophia called it a casual networking event. Translation, "You're coming with me so I can prove my husband isn't a myth." I put on my best "I'm not threatened by your boss" face and tagged along. We arrived at this pretentious downtown cafe where avocado toast cost more than my car insurance. Mark was already there, of course, white button-down, sleeves rolled to show off a watch that probably had its own security detail. He stood up, smiled that smug toothpaste commercial smile, and shook my hand like he was interviewing me for permission to date my wife. "Daniel, my man," he said, as if we'd been golfing buddies for years, "I've heard so much about you." "Oh, I bet you have," I said, trying to keep the smile from cracking. He laughed, that loud, performative laugh bosses use when they're pretending to like you but are really thinking about bonuses. "You're in finance, right? Numbers guy. I love that. The backbone of every successful company. You and we're the same. Analytical, disciplined." I nodded. "Sure, except I don't send people emails at 11 p.m. about PowerPoint transitions." Sophia shot me a warning glare, the kind that said, "Don't ruin this for me." Mark just chuckled. "Huh, you've got a sense of humor, Daniel. I like that." "Oh, I bet you do." The brunch went about as well as you'd expect. Mark dominated the conversation like a man trying to win an Oscar for most self-important human alive. He talked about his vision for the company, his revolutionary leadership style, his passion for mentoring young talent, which, by the way, was corporate code for "I take too much credit for other people's work." Every few minutes, he'd turn to Sophia and compliment her like she was an award he'd won. "Sophia, your campaign last quarter was outstanding. You have that spark," he said, touching his chest dramatically like he'd just witnessed art. "I always tell my team, surround yourself with people smarter than you." Then, with a smirk, which means I did something right hiring her. I smiled. "Oh, definitely. You've got great instincts. I mean, 3 marriages can't all be flukes." The table went silent. Mark's smile flickered for half a second before he recovered. "Ah, well," he said, forcing a laugh, "I suppose that's one way to look at experience." Sophia kicked me under the table so hard my soul left my body.
I took a sip of my coffee and said nothing. I was calm, I was zen, I was also mentally digging a grave with his name on it. After brunch, Sophia unleashed on me the second we got into the car. "What the hell was that?" she snapped. "What was what?" "You humiliated him." "Sweetheart," I said calmly, "he's a grown man with 3 divorces and a company therapist. I think he can handle a joke." "It wasn't funny. Neither is him calling you at midnight, but here we are." She groaned, exasperated. "You're jealous."
That word. That cursed word. The one that turns every rational concern into an emotional tantrum. "Jealous?" I said, laughing. "No, Sophia. Jealous is when I see someone else get the last piece of cheesecake. This is observation. There's a difference." She crossed her arms and stared out the window. "You're impossible." "And yet," I said, "you married me. Wild, right?" The silence that followed could have frozen lava. The next few days were weird. She was distant. I tried to make small talk. She kept things strictly work update level. It was like living with a polite stranger who occasionally borrowed my toothpaste. But I didn't push. I'd learned something about Sophia. If you confront her too early, she doubles down. If you wait, the guilt starts to eat her alive. Patience, in my experience, is the ultimate weapon. A week later, she invited me to another company function, Mark's team celebration dinner. Apparently, their department had landed a major client. "You should come," she said. "Mark insists." I smiled. "Oh, he insists. Then how could I say no?" The dinner was held at a private dining room in a fancy steakhouse, the kind of place where the napkins have their own zip code. Mark was predictably the loudest one there. He stood up for a toast, glass of red wine in hand. "To success," he boomed, "and to Sophia, who's been the shining star of this entire campaign." Everyone clapped. I raised my glass too. Then he looked at me, right at me, and said, "Daniel, you're a lucky man." It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like he was announcing that he'd personally approved my existence. "You're lucky," he continued, smirking. "She's the whole package." I grinned back, my voice sugar-coated poison. "Yeah, I know. Though it's funny, you say that like you've been trying to test the packaging yourself." Laughter exploded around the table, awkward and nervous. Mark blinked, smile faltering just enough to show I'd hit the mark. "You're a funny guy, Daniel." "Comes with the math degree," I said. "Keeps me sane." Sophia whispered through clenched teeth, "Please stop." But oh, I was just getting started. You see, sarcasm is like bourbon, best served smooth and slow. I wasn't mad, not yet. I was collecting data, observing patterns like a man building a case file. And everything about Mark screamed pattern. The unnecessary late-night calls, the over-the-top praise, the subtle digs at me disguised as banter. It was all there. And Sophia, for some reason, couldn't or wouldn't see it. After dinner, Mark approached me by the bar. "Hey," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were fraternity brothers. "Listen, I hope I didn't cross any lines earlier." "Lines?" I asked innocently. "No, of course not. You seem like a man who ignores boundaries professionally and personally." He chuckled nervously. "You're a sharp one. Sophia is lucky to have someone who keeps her grounded." "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "And you're lucky HR doesn't have hidden cameras." He froze for a beat, then forced a laugh. "You've got jokes, man. You should work in marketing." "Nah," I said, smiling. "Too many clowns." The drive home that night was silent again. Sophia was tense, probably rehearsing her TED Talk titled, "How My Husband Embarrassed My Boss and Ruined My Career Prospects." But I wasn't sorry. Someone had to draw a line. And if she wasn't going to, well, I was damn good at drawing lines. Comes with the analyst territory. When we got home, she finally spoke. "You can't keep doing that, Daniel." "Doing what? Breathing near your boss?" He's important to me. I used to be, remember those days? She glared. You're twisting things. No, Liv, I'm just reading the chart. And according to the data, Mark's trending upward, and I'm being phased out like an old software update. She shook her head, muttering something about needing space, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in lazy circles, wondering when marriage turned into a board meeting I didn't remember scheduling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Mark's smug laugh, his words echoing like a bad ad slogan, "You're a lucky man." Maybe I was lucky to see the red flags before they became permanent fixtures. Lucky to realize that sometimes the biggest threats to your marriage wear designer suits and call it mentorship. By morning, I made a decision. If Mark Davis wanted to play games, I'd play too. Only difference, I knew how to calculate the odds. And I never bet on a man who thinks professionalism ends at the dinner table. If hell had a catering budget, it would look exactly like Mark Davis's client appreciation dinner. The name alone sounded innocent. Grateful executives, polite applause, maybe a raffle for a company mug. But in reality, it was a brag fest with appetizers. Sophia called it networking. I called it emotional waterboarding with steak.
She'd been giddy about it all week, insisting we go. "It'll be fun," she said. "Everyone's bringing their partners," which I later learned translates to, "You'll stand next to me like furniture while people pretend to like you." We arrived at the Meridian, a restaurant so expensive even the valet looked judgmental. The kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide regret, but bright enough to showcase your insecurity. I walked in wearing my navy suit. Nothing flashy, just classic. Sophia, she looked like she'd walked out of a Vogue cover shoot. Her dress was sleek, her smile sharper than the steak knives. She was radiant in a way that made me feel both proud and uneasy. And when I saw Mark's face light up like a man watching a limited edition sports car roll past, I knew my instincts were clocking overtime. He stood there, glass of wine in hand, with that trademark "I'm everyone's boss and best friend" grin plastered across his face. "Sophia," he said, his voice smooth like he'd been practicing charm in the mirror. "You look like success itself." I chuckled softly, and here I thought success was supposed to be rare. He turned to me, eyebrows raised like he'd just spotted an unpaid intern. "And you must be the lucky accountant who gets to watch success every day." I forced a smile. Financial analyst, actually, but sure, lucky fits, especially when success doesn't text me after midnight about presentation slides. A few people overheard. One choked on their champagne. Sophia shot me that "please behave" look married people develop by year 2. Mark smirked. "You're a funny guy, Daniel." "Yeah," I said, "it's either laugh or drink heavily." The waiter arrived just in time to save us both from homicide. He poured wine like he was baptizing the table, and everyone started settling in. The company bigwigs were there. Executives, partners, clients who looked like they'd been waiting their whole lives to talk about golf. I could already tell I was outnumbered. Half the men were wearing watches that cost more than my student loans, and the women had smiles that said, "I've been nodding at these conversations for years." We took our seats. I was wedged between a junior marketing associate who kept nervously refreshing her phone and a client who introduced himself as Todd from Cincinnati and proceeded to tell me about his Tesla for 20 minutes straight. Sophia sat directly across from me, right beside Mark, because of course she did. "Strategic seating," she'd explained earlier. "He wants key people near the clients." Yeah, and apparently my wife's shoulder was the best icebreaker. Dinner started off civilized enough. Small talk, laughter, fake compliments, and lobster tails that looked too perfect to be trusted. I sipped my wine, smiled at the appropriate moments, and counted how many times Mark found excuses to touch Sophia's arm. By the 4th accidental brush, I started wondering if I could write this off as a business expense for emotional labor. Then came the toasts.
Mark stood up, raising his glass like he was about to announce world peace. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not just success, but excellence. This team has shown dedication, creativity, and above all, passion." His gaze landed on Sophia like a spotlight, and none more so than Sophia Grant. Her work ethic, her brilliance, it's truly inspiring. She's the heartbeat of this campaign. Applause echoed around the room. I clapped too, because what else could I do? But I noticed something in her smile, something practiced. She looked proud, yes, but also like she knew the praise came with fine print. Mark turned to me next. "And of course," he said, chuckling, "we can't forget the man who supports her from behind the scenes. You're a lucky guy, Daniel. She's the whole package." I raised my glass and smiled. "I know, though I'm starting to think the package comes with a subscription fee." A few people laughed quietly, mostly those who didn't depend on Mark for a paycheck. His jaw tightened, but he covered it with another laugh. "You've got a sharp tongue, my friend." "Just good observation skills," I said. "Helps in finance and marriage." Sophia's eyes flashed a warning. The silent plea was loud. "Don't do this here." I nodded like I'd behave. Spoiler, I wouldn't. The next hour dragged on like a bad sitcom. People bragged about profits, trips, team synergy, and other meaningless corporate buzzwords. I nodded through all of it, occasionally chiming in with gems like fascinating or wow, impressive, which translated meant please stop talking. At one point, Mark leaned in close to Sophia and whispered something that made her laugh softly, delicately, like a secret shared. My grip on the wineglass tightened. I wasn't jealous, I was observant. There's a difference. And what I was observing was a man enjoying himself a little too much with someone else's wife. Then he did it. The moment that turned the night from awkward to unforgettable. He leaned back in his chair, clearly 3 glasses deep into ego, and said, "You know, Sophia could do way better than you, Daniel." Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. You could hear the sound of collective discomfort settling over the table like dust. Sophia gasped softly, eyes wide. Mark smirked, confident in his own untouchable status. "You're a good man," he continued, "but not her level. No offense." I set down my glass slowly, smiled the way you do when you've already decided to burn everything down, and said, "Mark, I think you're right." He blinked. "I am," I said, leaning back casually. "You'd know all about people doing better. You've been married 3 times. You've had the most practice." Laughter burst out before anyone could stop it. The junior associate nearly spit out her drink. One of the clients coughed into his napkin to hide a grin. Mark's face turned the color of his Cabernet. He stammered, "Now, that's not very professional." "Professional?" I interrupted, feigning surprise. "You called your last secretary honey in a board meeting, didn't you? HR loved that one. I heard it's still trending." Sophia's face was pale. "Daniel, stop." But I wasn't angry. I was calm. Too calm. There's a certain kind of serenity that comes when you realize you have nothing left to lose. The kind that turns every word into a weapon wrapped in charm. "Relax, Mark," I said, grinning. "We're just having fun, right? You like to push boundaries. I'm just exploring them with you." He tried to laugh it off, but his hands trembled slightly. The room was dead silent now. Even the waiter had vanished into the safety of the kitchen. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to make everyone lean in. "Tell me, Mark,
What exactly does better look like to you? Someone who works weekends and calls it passion? Someone who spends $3,000 on a suit but forgets his anniversary? Or maybe someone who calls his Tesla a reward for leadership but can't reverse park without the intern guiding him? Laughter rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. Even the CEO cracked a restrained smile behind his glass. Mark looked like he was one PowerPoint slide away from a breakdown. "Here's to better, Mark," I said, lifting my glass. "May you find it before your next divorce." That sealed it. The table erupted. A few people clapped. Others pretended to suddenly remember their side dishes. Mark's jaw clenched so tight, I thought his veneers might file for workers' comp. Sophia looked mortified. "Daniel, that was uncalled for," she whispered. I smiled, still calm, still in control. Maybe, but damn, it felt necessary. The rest of dinner was a blur. Mark avoided eye contact. The CEO politely shifted topics to quarterly earnings, and the tension could have been sliced thinner than the steak. I just sat there sipping my wine, feeling strangely liberated. For years, I played the quiet, agreeable husband, the man who kept the peace while his wife's career soared. But tonight, I'd stepped off the sidelines. Tonight, I reminded everyone, including Sophia, that silence wasn't the same as weakness. When dessert arrived, some overpriced mousse pretending to be art, Mark stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me," he said, voice tight, "I have an early flight." Translation: "I need to salvage my dignity before it dissolves." As he walked out, I raised my glass again. "Safe travels, boss. Don't forget to expense the therapy." Laughter followed him all the way out. By the time we left, Sophia wasn't speaking to me. Her heels clicked furiously against the floor. Every step screaming, "We'll talk about this later." I didn't mind. Talking later was her favorite form of denial. I opened the car door for her like a gentleman, because if you're going to burn bridges, you might as well do it politely.
The ride home was silent, except for her shallow breathing and the distant hum of the engine. I looked out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red. My mind was oddly clear. Somewhere between Mark's insult and my toast, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was self-respect finally crawling out of hibernation. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. The next morning, things wouldn't go back to normal. They never do after the first explosion. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of silence. The married kind of silence that feels like a hostage negotiation in progress. Sophia wasn't in bed. Her side was neatly made, the way hotel staff tuck corners when they're mad at you for existing. I walked into the kitchen to find her already dressed for work, sipping coffee like it was keeping her dignity alive. She didn't look up. "I can't believe you humiliated me like that last night." "Good morning to you too," I said, pouring my own cup. She turned, jaw tight. "Do you even realize what you did?" I nodded. "Yeah, I turned dinner into a TED Talk about boundaries. You're welcome." "Daniel, you embarrassed my boss in front of clients." I smirked. Technically, he embarrassed himself. I just provided commentary. She set her cup down hard enough to make it tremble. "He was joking." "Oh, so when he says you could do better, that's just workplace humor. Guess I missed the HR memo about emotional affairs being team-building activities." She glared. "That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" I asked, because it sure looked like a man marking territory that doesn't belong to him. That stopped her for a moment. Her voice dropped. "You're paranoid, Daniel." I laughed softly. "And you're defending a man who insults your husband in public, so I guess we're even." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, muttering something about me being childish. I watched her go, calm as ever. See, here's the thing. Once you stop fearing the fallout,
It's amazing how peaceful nuclear war can feel. That evening, she came home later than usual. Her lipstick was faded, her eyes tired, her mood somewhere between exhausted and furious. "Mark wants to talk to you." "Oh? About what? My comedic timing?" "This isn't funny," she snapped. "He said he wants to clear the air." I leaned back on the couch. "He's welcome to try, but I charge for therapy sessions." "I'm serious, Daniel. He's inviting us to another dinner. Just the three of us." "Oh, perfect," I said. "A sequel. Maybe this time he can insult me before dessert." She folded her arms. "Please, just behave. I need this job." That hit differently. I need this job, not we. I looked at her and realized we weren't exactly on the same team anymore. But fine, I agreed. Not because I cared what Mark thought, but because part of me wanted to see just how deep this rabbit hole went.
The next evening, I found myself walking into yet another upscale restaurant, the kind where menus don't have prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford to sit down. Mark was already there, standing near the table with his trademark smirk and a glass of red wine that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand, "glad you could make it." I shook it firmly. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I needed closure and entertainment. He chuckled, pretending to take the high road. "Let's start fresh, shall we?" "Sure," I said, sliding into my chair. "But let's use actual silverware this time, not sarcasm disguised as compliments." He hesitated. Sophia gave me a warning glance. "Mark just wants to apologize." He nodded, putting on his best PR damage control face. "I may have taken things too far at the last dinner. It was inappropriate, and I'm sorry." I stared at him for a moment, then smiled. "Apology accepted. Though you might want to practice that speech. HR loves that kind of sincerity." Sophia sighed audibly. "Can we please have one dinner without you turning it into stand-up comedy?" "I'm trying," I said, "but the material just keeps writing itself." For the first 10 minutes, the tension could have been cut with a butter knife. Mark was polite, overly polite, asking about my work, my hobbies, my insights into finance. You know, all the things people pretend to care about before circling back to the topic they actually want to discuss. Then he leaned back, swirled his wine, and said it. "You know, Daniel, I just want you to understand. Sophia's got real potential. I see something in her." "Oh, I'm sure you do," I said. He smiled faintly. "I mean professionally, of course." "Of course," I said, nodding, because nothing says professional like 11 p.m. PowerPoint emergencies. Sophia gasped softly. "Daniel." But I wasn't done. "Let me ask you something, Mark. When you text her late at night, is that strategy session before or after your wife goes to bed?" He froze, wine glass halfway to his lips. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, calm as a saint at confession. "You keep saying it's work, but I don't recall inappropriate timing being part of the job description." His face reddened. "That's not what's happening." "Of course not," I said. "You're a mentor, and she's just lucky to have your guidance. Lucky is the word you like, right?" He blinked, realizing I'd quoted him from the last dinner. "This isn't productive. Neither is flirting with employees, but here we are." Sophia slammed her fork down. "Enough, both of you. You're acting like children." I turned to her. "I'm not the one who brought a man home in her phone, Sophia." Her eyes went wide. "That's not fair." "Neither was that comment he made in front of everyone. But you didn't defend me then, did you?" She fell silent. Mark tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No, you stay out of this. You've already said enough in your 3 divorces to fill a courtroom." For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then, unbelievably, Mark laughed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." "Thanks," I said. "They come in handy when I'm dealing with parasites." He leaned forward, his composure cracking.
You know what your problem is, Daniel? You're threatened by your wife's success. You can't stand that she's outgrown you. Sophia's breath caught. He'd said the quiet part out loud. I laughed. A deep, calm, dangerous laugh. You think this is about success? No, Mark. This is about respect. Something you seem to misplaced between your affairs and your self-promotion. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. But you're right about one thing. She has outgrown something, just not me. Sophia's eyes darted between us, panic creeping in. Daniel, please don't. But I was already done. I leaned on the table, looked Mark dead in the eye, and said, "You ever talk about my marriage again, I'll make sure your next job title is unemployed. And trust me, your reputation won't survive the PowerPoint I'll make about you." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because for once, the man who always had something to say didn't. I dropped a few bills on the table, looked at Sophia, and said, "Enjoy your meal. It's on me. Consider it my last investment in this circus." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the chaos I left behind. Mark's red face, Sophia's stunned silence, the waiter pretending not to have opinions. I walked through the restaurant lobby, past the polished mirrors and overpriced artwork, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Outside, the night air hit me like a baptism. Cool, clean, honest. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. Mark thought he'd embarrassed me. What they didn't realize was that I just switched strategies. If they wanted drama, they could keep it. I was moving to data. The next day, I went to work early, 6 a.m., my favorite hour, when the office smells like burnt coffee and regret. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started pulling threads. You see, finance teaches you to spot patterns. Numbers never lie. But people, they write entire fiction novels in spreadsheets. I checked corporate filings, expense reports, travel reimbursements. Nothing illegal, but plenty interesting. Mark's client dinners happened suspiciously often at the same restaurant. The same nights, Sophia worked late. Cute. By noon, I'd compiled a dossier so organized it could have testified in court. Still, this wasn't about exposure. Not yet. I wanted to understand how deep his stupidity ran and how far Sophia was willing to defend it.
That evening, she came home exhausted, eyes puffy like she'd been crying or pretending not to. "Rough day?" she murmured. "Oh yeah," I said casually, not looking up from my laptop. "What happened? Printer jam or moral dilemma?" She froze. "Don't start." I smiled. "I didn't. Mark did. I'm just reading the minutes." "Daniel," she warned. "Please, he's still my boss." I raised an eyebrow. "For now," she frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I closed the laptop slowly, savoring the moment. It means people who mistake charm for competence usually get replaced by people who don't. "Are you threatening him?" she asked, half shocked, half intrigued. The same tone someone might use if they caught you looking confident for the first time in years. "Threatening?" I chuckled. "No, just predicting market correction." Friday came faster than gossip, and with it, Mark's grand company luncheon, a casual buffet to celebrate their recent project launch. I wasn't invited, obviously, but fate and curiosity are nosy roommates. Sophia left early, dressed to kill in corporate chic. I waited 30 minutes, then put on a suit of my own and headed downtown. When I walked into the hotel ballroom, no one stopped me. I looked like I belonged. Confidence is the best security badge. The place was everything you'd expect, a sea of name tags, overpriced appetizers, and laughter that sounded like people trying too hard to prove they were important. Mark stood near the carving station, holding court like a dictator of mediocre ideas. "Daniel," he said when he finally noticed me, voice pitched somewhere between surprise and fear. "Didn't know you'd be joining us?" I smiled. "Neither did HR." He laughed nervously. "Here for Sophia, I assume?" "Partly, mostly for the food." I grabbed a plate and started loading it like I was preparing for hibernation. Never pass up free steak. Company might not be around next quarter. His smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "Relax," I said, slicing into the meat. "Just making conversation." Sophia appeared beside him, her smile strained enough to crack. "Daniel, can we talk?" "Sure," I said, "but I'm mid-experiment. Seeing how long I can eat in peace before someone calls security." Mark cleared his throat. "Maybe we should keep things civil." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what your HR policy says, right under the section about inappropriate comments at work events." The crowd around us began to notice. People love tension more than dessert. I set down my fork, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and leaned back like an attorney approaching the witness stand. "Tell me, Mark," I said conversationally, "what does better look like? Someone who works weekends and calls it passion? Someone who spends $3,000 on a suit but forgets his mortgage payment?" Laughter rippled through the group. Mark's face reddened. "You think this is funny?" "Actually, yeah," I said. "It's hilarious, especially considering you call your Tesla a reward for leadership, but can't reverse park without the intern guiding you." A few chuckles escaped. Even the CEO, standing across the room, pretended to cough into his drink. Mark looked around, realizing control was slipping. "You're way out of line, Daniel." "Out of line?" I echoed. "Coming from the man who once emailed a junior associate at midnight with, and I quote, 'We need to talk about your dress presentation.'" A collective gasp. I shrugged. "Public records, man. Delete faster next time." Sophia whispered furiously, "Stop it." But I wasn't angry. Anger was for amateurs. I was deliberate. Every word measured, every punch disguised as politeness. "See, Mark," I continued, "you told my wife she could do better. You implied I'm not her level, and you're right, I'm not. My level involves honesty, stability, and not needing interns to inflate my ego." He snapped. "You have no idea what it takes to run a company." "Oh," I said, smiling. "It's just that where I come from, leadership isn't measured by how many people laugh at your jokes out of fear." The room was silent now. The buffet line had stopped moving. Even the shrimp cocktail looked uncomfortable. Sophia grabbed my arm. "We're leaving." "Not yet," I said gently. "I'm almost done." I turned back to Mark. "Here's to better. Remember? May you find it before your next divorce." Half the room laughed. Half pretended not to. Someone clapped. I raised my glass of water, couldn't risk red wine on my suit, and toasted to professionalism. Mark's lips pressed into a line so tight you could have used it to cut glass. He set his drink down and muttered, "This conversation's over." "Agreed," I said cheerfully. "I've had my fill, and the buffet is better company anyway." We left the ballroom to a murmur of whispers and suppressed laughter. Sophia didn't speak until we reached the parking lot. "What the hell was that?" "An exit interview?" I said. "You humiliated him again?" "No," I said, unlocking the car. "He humiliated himself. I just brought the PowerPoint." She crossed her arms. "You're ruining my career." "No, Sophia, I'm saving your reputation. There's a difference." She laughed bitterly. "By turning me into gossip? By reminding people your husband's not a doormat," I said. "You keep forgetting that matters too." She shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "You've changed." I smiled sadly. "No, I just stopped apologizing for noticing red flags." The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills every corner of a car until even the GPS feels awkward. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there. She stared out the window like the glass might offer her an escape route. "Finally," she whispered. "I didn't ask for this war." "Neither did I said. "But your boss started it when he decided my marriage was a networking opportunity." She turned toward me, voice breaking. "You think I wanted him to say those things? To look at me like that?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The exhaustion, the guilt, the faint sadness hiding behind defiance.
"No," I said softly. "I think you wanted someone to make you feel seen again, and I get that. I just wish it hadn't been him." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "What now?" "Now," I said, stepping out of the car, "I go inside, eat leftovers, and sleep like a man who's finally done pretending." Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd once planned vacations and dreamed about a house with a backyard. Now it felt like a courtroom. Memories on one side, reality on the other. I opened my laptop again, stared at Mark's expense reports one last time, then closed it. I didn't need more evidence. Truth had already shown up, uninvited and undeniable. The next morning, Sophia tried to make small talk over breakfast. "You working from home today?" "Yeah," I said, buttering toast. "It's quieter when no one's lying." She didn't respond. I spent the day pretending to focus on spreadsheets, but really I was drafting something else. The speech I'd give when this marriage inevitably hit its final audit. Every relationship has an inventory day when you tally what's left and what's lost. Turns out, ours had a deficit labeled trust.
That evening, she came into my office, eyes red. "Mark called me in. The CEO heard what happened. There's talk of a review." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll finally review his character. This isn't a joke." "I'm not laughing," I said quietly. "But maybe karma is." She started crying. Real tears this time, not performative ones. "I just wanted you to support me." "I did," I said, "until supporting you meant applauding him." She sank into the chair opposite me, defeated. "I don't know what to do anymore." I sighed, leaning back. "Then don't. Let life do it for you." That night, while she slept restlessly in the next room, I packed a small overnight bag. Nothing dramatic, just the essentials: clothes, wallet, self-respect. I wasn't running away. I was stepping back. Distance, after all, is the best magnifier of truth. Before leaving, I scribbled a note on the kitchen counter. "You said I embarrassed you. Maybe, but I'd rather be the man who embarrassed a liar than the man who tolerated one." Then I walked out. The night air felt different, colder, clearer, freer. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was losing. I felt like I was finally testifying. There's something oddly peaceful about the moment you realize a relationship has hit the expiration date. Like finding spoiled milk in the fridge. You're disgusted, sure, but also relieved you finally know what that smell was. For me, that realization came wrapped in a designer napkin at a restaurant with overpriced water and undercooked sincerity. After the buffet incident, Sophia and I didn't talk for 2 straight days. She left early for work, came home late, and avoided eye contact like it was a tax audit. I didn't chase her. I wasn't the chasing type anymore. I was the man who'd learned the fine art of waiting for the right words, the right moment, or, in this case, the final straw. It arrived Saturday night, gift-wrapped in tension. She asked if we could meet for dinner to talk. That phrase, "to talk," should be listed as a controlled substance. It's never good news. Nobody says "to talk" when they're planning a surprise vacation. I put on my black suit, the one I wore when I wanted to remind people I could look like a man who had his life together, and met her at a restaurant called Verve, because pretentious names are mandatory when love's about to die. She was already there when I walked in. Hair flawless, makeup perfect, face unreadable. She'd chosen a corner table, of course. Private, strategic, the kind of table people pick when they're about to break your heart, but still want dessert. I sat down across from her and smiled. "So, are we celebrating the end of my reputation or just getting ahead of next week's scandal?" She didn't laugh. "Daniel, don't do that." "Do what? Turn everything into a joke?" "Oh, sorry," I said, waving at the waiter. "I'll order some seriousness with my steak." She sighed. "This isn't funny. You made me look bad." I nodded slowly. "And you made me look invisible. I guess we're even." Her eyes flashed. "You humiliated my boss." "Who humiliated me first?"
Funny how your moral compass only spins when his name's on the map. Her lips tightened. Mark was out of line. Yes, but you didn't have to destroy his career over it. Destroy? Ha, sweetheart, I told a few truths in a public setting. The man self-destructed. I just lit the match. She shook her head, disbelief mixing with something else. Fear, maybe. You're so calm about this. Calm, I said, smiling faintly. That's not calm. That's clarity. The waiter came, asked if we were ready to order. Sophia waved him off. Give us a few minutes. Then she leaned in, eyes cold. You need to apologize to him. For a second, I thought she was joking. Then I saw her expression, the kind that made HR departments nervous. I laughed quietly, like someone told a bad joke. You're serious? Yes. You went too far, Daniel. You made things worse for everyone. You embarrassed me in front of my colleagues, my friends. Friends who laughed when your boss told you could do better, I asked. Those friends? You don't understand how corporate culture works. Oh, I understand perfectly. You kiss up, you cover for incompetence, and when the smoke clears, you blame the honest guy for pointing at the fire. Stop twisting this. I'm not twisting it, Sophia. I'm just refusing to gaslight myself. She pushed her plate away and crossed her arms. Apologize, Daniel. Tonight. Call him. Make it right. I stared at her for a long moment, then set my napkin down. You know, for years I thought the problem was communication. Turns out it's comprehension. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If you don't, we're over. There it was, the ultimatum, delivered like a verdict, sharp and heavy. The restaurant noise faded, and all I could hear was the faint hum of betrayal. I should have been angry, I should have argued, but all I felt was done. Like a man watching a movie he's already seen 3 times and finally deciding to walk out before the credits.
I took a slow sip of my water, then smiled. You know what's funny, Sophia? For years, I've been saving ammo, biting my tongue, playing the quiet husband. But tonight, I think I'm all out of reasons to keep pretending. She frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said softly, I'm not apologizing to a man who doesn't know the difference between leadership and lust. Her voice rose. You're impossible, and you're loyal to the wrong people. Say it, she demanded. Say you're sorry or we're done. I leaned forward, eyes steady. Then, I guess, we're done. The silence that followed was brutal, beautiful, freeing. She blinked, stunned. You're really doing this? I'm not doing anything, I said, standing. You gave me a choice. I just picked the one that doesn't involve self-respect on clearance. She stood too, voice trembling with anger. Don't walk away from me, Daniel. I'm not walking away, I said calmly, adjusting my jacket. I'm stepping back so you can see what you've become. Her breath hitched. You'll regret this. I smiled, genuinely this time. Maybe, but at least I'll do it from a comfortable distance. The waiter, poor soul, appeared again, oblivious to the nuclear fallout happening at table 7. Would you two care for dessert? I looked at him, then at her. Yeah, I said, bring her something sweet. She's gonna need it. Then I turned and walked out. The air outside was cool, sharp, honest. No perfume, no pretense. I loosened my tie, exhaled, and laughed quietly to myself. For once, I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just done. Done pretending the problem was solvable. Done apologizing for calling out disrespect. Done fighting battles in a war I never declared. As I walked down the street, my phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. Don't do this. We can fix it. I typed back. We can't fix what you refuse to see. Then I blocked the number, not out of spite, but mercy for both of us. I ended up at a late-night diner. Greasy tables, fluorescent lights, and the best pancakes in the city. The waitress poured me coffee and smiled.
Rough night? I grinned. You could say that. My marriage just filed for early retirement. She laughed. Congrats or condolences? Still deciding. I ate my pancakes, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Us at the lake, us at her sister's wedding, us pretending everything was fine. Funny how every smile looks different in hindsight. I wasn't sad anymore. Nostalgic, maybe, but not sad. There's a difference between losing something and realizing it's already been gone for a while.
When I got home, the house was dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. On the kitchen counter, she'd left her ring. It was placed neatly beside my coffee mug, like a final signature on a silent contract. No note, no explanation, just the glint of metal and a shadow of what used to be love. I picked it up, held it to the light, and smiled. "You were right, Mark," I muttered. "She could do better, and so could I." I set the ring down and poured myself a drink. Whiskey. Neat. Because this wasn't a night for mixers or hesitation. As the burn hit my throat, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief, not pride, just release. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of nothing, and it was glorious. No phone buzzing, no whispered apologies, no pretending. Just peace. I made breakfast for one, cleaned the kitchen, and started deleting photos. It wasn't bitterness, it was inventory. Every picture I erased felt like reclaiming square footage in my own head. By noon, I packed a bag. Not because I needed to leave, but because I wanted to move forward. The world suddenly felt wide again. Like maybe, just maybe, the chapter after this one didn't have to be tragic. It could be honest. As I locked the door, I whispered to myself, Mark Davis can keep his arrogance. Sophia can keep her excuses. And I'll keep my dignity. Fair trade. And for the first time in years, that actually felt like winning. There's a certain power in disappearing. Not the dramatic movie-style kind with fake passports and burner phones, but the quiet, strategic kind where you pull the plug on every line people use to drain your sanity. For 2 weeks, I went ghost mode. No texts, no calls, no emails. I was a deleted contact with a pulse. Sophia probably thought I was sulking somewhere, nursing my pride, and waiting for her to come back with an apology reheated in guilt. Cute theory. The truth? I was rebuilding, not my heart, but my exit plan. I'd always believed in the art of graceful revenge. You don't storm the castle, you buy it, renovate it, and evict the king. Sophia didn't know it yet, but I'd been quietly preparing my financial independence long before our marriage started wheezing. Call it intuition or call it trauma prevention, but I'd set aside a separate savings account in my name, funded through overtime projects and consulting gigs she never bothered to ask about. I told her it was just side money for emergencies. Turns out, betrayal qualifies. So, while she was likely pacing her apartment, rehearsing apologies or new excuses, I was busy drafting my exit strategy like a CFO prepping a hostile takeover. The first step was money, the oxygen of any good vanishing act. Our joint savings, half of that technically belonged to me. But here's where being the numbers guy paid off. I'd handled most of our banking, which meant I knew exactly which accounts were joined in name only and which ones were fair game. One quick transfer later, my separate account became a little heavier and her business class credit card became a lot quieter. So, while she was likely pacing her apartment, rehearsing apologies or new excuses, I was busy drafting my exit strategy like a CFO prepping a hostile takeover. The first step was money, the oxygen of any good vanishing act. Our joint savings, half of that technically belonged to me. But here's where being the numbers guy paid off. I'd handled most of our banking, which meant I knew exactly which accounts were joined in name only and which ones were fair game. One quick transfer later, my separate account became a little heavier and her business class credit card became a lot quieter. The next step was location. I didn't want to run. Running implies guilt. I wanted to relocate strategically. So I booked a furnished apartment downtown under an LLC I'd set up a year ago for freelance finance consulting. Pro tip, always have an LLC. It's like a prenup, but smarter. The lease was clean, the utilities prepaid, and the address private. While she was playing damage control at work, probably convincing HR that I was just emotionally unstable, I was sipping black coffee in my new apartment, watching the morning news, and smiling every time her boss's name flashed across the ticker. Because, oh yes, I'd made one very polite phone call before disappearing. His name was Mr. Greer, board liaison and company gatekeeper. I'd found his contact buried in a press release 6 months ago. A small, forgettable name to most, but gold to me. I told him I wanted to report a pattern of inappropriate conduct involving the marketing director, Mark Davis, at company functions. I made it sound hesitant, almost reluctant. The voice of a man who didn't want trouble, just decency. I didn't even have to lie. Every word was true. The dinner, the comments, the late-night messages, all documented, all recorded. You'd be amazed how often people forget that always-on mics exist on modern phones. I sent him a few anonymous audio files and screenshots. Nothing damning on Sophia's part, just enough to prove Mark's ego had finally outpaced his intelligence. Mr. Greer thanked me for my concern for the company's reputation. By the time I hung up, I'd given them the rope. Whether they used it was up to them. Spoiler, they did. A week later, the corporate gossip mill started churning. A little bird from LinkedIn whispered that Mark was taking an indefinite leave of absence. Translation, fired, but allowed to pack slowly. The board launched an internal review, and HR sent out those awkward values and workplace ethics memos that mean someone important just got caught being stupid. When I heard the news, I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast or dance or post vague quotes about karma. I just smiled quietly and kept reading. Because that's the thing about real revenge. It's not about victory. It's about closure. 2 days after the story broke, Sophia showed up at my door. I'd almost expected it. Heartbreak has a schedule. She stood there looking like a motivational poster that had been left out in the rain. Hair frizzy, mascara smudged, eyes red. She wore one of those soft beige sweaters she always used when she wanted to look approachable. It worked on strangers. "Daniel," she said softly, "we need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe. "We've been needing to talk for 3 years now. Now you want to start?" She swallowed hard. "Please, just 5 minutes." I stepped aside. "Sure, you've had longer to lie, so 5 minutes feels merciful." She walked in, glancing around the apartment. "You moved fast." "Yeah," I said. "Turns out betrayal is a great productivity booster." She turned to me, desperate. "I made a mistake, okay? I overreacted. I shouldn't have given you that ultimatum." I crossed my arms. "You mean the one where I had to apologize to your boss or lose my marriage?" "Yeah, I remember. Real romantic." Her lip trembled. "He was fired, Daniel. The board launched an investigation. They think I leaked it." I widened my eyes, feigning shock. "Oh no, that's terrible. Who would do such a thing?" "Stop," she said, tears forming. "Please stop." I sighed, sitting on the edge of the table. "You know, Liv, for someone who claimed to be such a good judge of character, you sure surrounded yourself with fools." She sat down, face in her hands. "I lost my job. They said I should have reported him sooner. They're investigating my emails. Everything's falling apart." "Ah," I said, nodding. "So you finally know what it's like to be publicly humiliated. Welcome to the club." Her voice cracked. "You think this makes us even?" "Even?" I leaned forward. "No. You embarrassed me in front of a dozen people. He insulted me in front of a room full of clients. But I made sure both of you answered to something bigger than me. Consequence." She stared at me, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're not the man I married." "Good," I said quietly. He was too patient. For a while, she just sat there crying silently. Then she whispered, "Can't we fix this? We built a life together." I laughed softly. "You built a life with a man who thought you were better off without me. Congratulations. You got your wish." Her eyes darted toward the window. "Where do we go from here?" "We?" I said, standing. "There's no we anymore. Just you and your reflection. I'm sure you two will have a lot to talk about." She stood, too, trembling. "Daniel, please. I know I hurt you, but you can't just vanish. Watch me." I opened the door. She hesitated, then turned back. "You ruined his career." I smiled. "No, Sophia. He ruined his own. I just sent the receipts." She left without another word. I watched her walk down the hall, shoulders slumped, dignity somewhere back in the elevator. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the city lights. They looked different now, cleaner, sharper, less forgiving. I thought about how much energy I'd wasted trying to be the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the quiet husband who let everything slide in the name of understanding. But understanding doesn't build respect. It just gives manipulators a longer leash. I poured myself a drink and raised it in an invisible toast. "To disappearing," I said quietly. "May no one see you coming or going until you're already free." The next morning, I turned off my phone for good. Changed my email, closed the joint account, deleted old photos, old messages, old ghosts. I didn't need any more closure. Sometimes the best revenge is silence. Not the kind that begs for attention, but the kind that makes people realize you were the quietest storm they ever underestimated. By week's end, I was just a rumor in her contact list. And somewhere out there, Mark Davis was drafting a LinkedIn post about resilience and career pivots. Cute. As for me, I didn't need to explain where I'd gone or why. I'd already said everything I needed to the one person who never listened. There's a special kind of peace that comes after chaos. The kind you don't trust. The kind that feels like the universe is just catching its breath before punching you again. That was me 3 weeks after Sophia's meltdown. Life was quiet. Too quiet. My mornings started with coffee instead of confrontation. And my nights ended without someone accusing me of being too logical for emotional growth. I was eating better, sleeping better, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to share my bathroom sink with someone who treated toothpaste caps like optional accessories. I had new routines. My phone stayed on silent, my emails were clean, my apartment didn't smell like her perfume, that citrus blend that used to make me weak but now reminded me of overpriced guilt. I was, for lack of a better word, free. And freedom, I discovered, doesn't come with trumpets or parades. It comes with an eerie calm that says, you finally stopped trying to fix things that weren't broken. You were just with the wrong mechanic. Then, one morning, around 8 a.m., there was a knock on my door. 3 short, nervous taps, like guilt in human form. I didn't rush to answer. People who knock early in the morning fall into 2 categories, delivery drivers or people bringing bad news. And I hadn't ordered anything lately. When I finally opened the door, there she was, Sophia, my ex-wife in everything but paperwork. She looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired you get from work, the kind that comes from realizing your ego isn't a sustainable energy source. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen, and her expression was caught somewhere between regret and panic. "Daniel," she breathed, clutching her purse like it was life support. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. "You've got to stop opening with that line. It's cursed." She frowned. "Can I come in?" "Depends. Are you here to return my peace or borrow more of it?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Please." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, scanning the apartment. "You've redecorated." "Yeah," I said. "Turns out a space looks bigger when you remove the tension." She ignored the jab and turned to face me. "I don't know how to say this. Try honesty. It's rare, but I hear it works." She flinched. "Mark was fired." "Oh, that's old news," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Corporate HR finally found its spine. Good for them." She took a shaky breath. "The board launched an internal review. They think I leaked the evidence. I turned slowly, feigning surprise. No. Yes, she said, voice trembling. They said the anonymous email came from my work address. I'm suspended, pending investigation. I set my mug down carefully. Wow, that's awful. Her eyes narrowed. You don't sound surprised. I took a long sip, meeting her stare over the rim. Oh, I'm surprised they took this long. Her jaw dropped. You? I smiled. Who else? You think Mark Davis just tripped over his own arrogance into a career grave? Her voice rose. You ruined my life. Correction, I said, calm but sharp. I ruined his life. You just happened to be standing next to him when the lightning hit. She shook her head, disbelief plastered across her face. You reported him. You sent those files. Anonymous tip, I said. Very professional, even attached timestamps. Her voice broke. They think I was complicit. They think I leaked it to save my own job. I shrugged. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to be misjudged in public. Full circle moment. Do you even care what's happening to me? She cried. Care? I said softly. You defended a man who told me you could do better, Sophia. You called me impossible for setting boundaries. I stopped caring when you started apologizing for him instead of standing up for us. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't cheat, Daniel. I nodded. And I didn't kill Mark's career. I just gave gravity a push. She sank onto the couch, covering her face. Everything's falling apart. My job, my reputation. Your excuses, I interrupted. Don't forget those. She looked up at me, red-eyed. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I let him manipulate me. And when I pointed it out, I was paranoid. I said you were right, okay? She winced. You were right about everything. I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I just leaned back against the counter and stared at her. You know what's funny? People think being right feels good. It doesn't. It just means you watch the car crash you predicted in slow motion. She sniffled. I deserve that. No, I said. You deserve honesty. The version I gave you the whole time. The one you mistook for sarcasm. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the hum of my refrigerator and the faint noise of her dignity trying to respawn. Finally, she whispered, Can we start over? I raised an eyebrow. Start over, Sophia? This isn't Monopoly. You don't get a do-over because you rolled bad decisions. I know, she said quickly, but I don't know where else to go. Everyone at work hates me. The friends who used to invite me to brunch stopped replying. I'm learning, I said. Pays the tuition for self-awareness. Consider this your full scholarship. She laughed through her tears, a broken, bitter sound. You always have a line for everything. Occupational hazard, I said. You crunch enough numbers and you start to see patterns, like how people only come back when the house they burned finally cools down. She wiped her face. You think I deserve this? I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No one deserves humiliation, but some people earn the consequences that lead to it. She stared at the floor. I miss you. I sighed. You miss the version of me that made you feel safe. The version you outgrew in public but depended on in private. That guy doesn't live here anymore. Her lip trembled. You don't even sound angry. Because I'm not, I said. Anger means I still want something from you. I don't. She nodded slowly, understanding creeping in like dawn. So, that's it. That's it, I said. You wanted me to apologize for respecting myself. I refused. You chose him. He fell. Now you're falling too. That's not revenge, Liv. That's math. She stood up, clutching her bag like a shield. I don't know what I expected. Closure, I said. Everyone comes looking for it. Here's yours. You were loved by someone who would have taken a bullet for you. You chose the man handing out the bullets instead. She flinched like the words were physical. Then, in a voice small enough to break glass, she whispered, I really did love you.
"I know," I said quietly. "You just loved yourself more." She turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "What are you going to do now?" I smiled faintly. "Live. You should try it sometime, without pretending it's networking." The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle like dust. The strangest part wasn't relief or satisfaction. It was the emptiness, like finishing a marathon you didn't realize you'd been running barefoot.
I walked over to the window, looking down at the street below. Cars moved, people hustled, the world went on, perfectly indifferent. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the universal symbol of I survived that conversation. As I sat on the couch, I thought about how easily she'd used the word we. We can fix this. We need to talk. We built a life. But we had always been one-sided. Me building, her editing. And now, for the first time, I didn't want we anymore. Just me. Later that night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it. Peace doesn't require permission. I turned on some music, old soul, because irony, and let it fill the apartment. I wasn't celebrating her downfall or gloating over justice. I was just existing, finally on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the real shock. Not that she showed up broken, but that I didn't feel responsible for putting her back together. Closure isn't a conversation, it's a verdict. People think it happens with candles and tissues and hugs that smell like second chances. In reality, it happens on a Tuesday, over cold coffee, when you finally realize you don't owe anyone an explanation for healing. Sophia called again from an unknown number this time. Rookie move. I answered out of morbid curiosity, like watching a sequel you know will flop. "Daniel, please," she said, "can we meet just to talk?" "You really love reruns, huh?" I replied. But I agreed, because closure apparently needed one last meeting on neutral ground. A cafe we used to visit back when love was still affordable. She looked different, smaller somehow. No confidence, no corporate shine. Just a woman sitting across from the man she'd bet against. "I lost everything," she said quietly. "Not everything," I said, stirring my coffee. "You still have the ability to learn." She smiled weakly. "You still talk like a therapist who charges extra for sarcasm." "Yeah," I said, "it's part of my rebranding." She leaned forward. "Can't we fix this? I know I ruined things, but maybe—" I held up a hand. "Stop. We're not broken. We're concluded. There's a difference. You can't rebuild something that was designed to collapse." Her eyes watered. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said. "You wanted power, Sophia. You got it. It just didn't come with peace." She looked down, whispering, "I never stopped loving you." I took a breath and smiled. Not the cruel kind, the kind you give when the storm has finally passed. And I never stopped wishing you'd figure out what love actually meant. When she left, I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Some endings are too clean to mourn. I paid the bill, walked outside, and let the wind hit my face like punctuation. Closure wasn't revenge, it was peace. The kind you earn when you stop trying to explain your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. Rumor had it Sophia went freelance. Less marketing executive, more LinkedIn philosopher. Every few weeks, someone sent me one of her posts. Motivational quotes about growth and accountability. Always written by the woman who learned both the hard way. Mark, he's consulting. That's corporate code for unemployed with a fancy email signature. As for me, I'm good. No, better. I'm quietly unstoppable. I sleep through the night, I eat without tension, and my mirror doesn't flinch when I walk by. Done used to mean slamming doors and shouting matches. Now it means silence that doesn't ache. I didn't rebuild my life. I reclaimed it. Bought a new couch, painted the walls, deleted old playlists. Turns out, healing isn't dramatic, it's logistical. It's changing passwords, canceling shared subscriptions, and realizing you like your own company more than you ever liked being tolerated. Months later, she texted from a new number. "Do you ever think about us?"
I stared at the screen, smiling. Not bitter, not smug, just free. Then I typed, "Of course, every time I see a bad manager on LinkedIn." I hit send, turned off my phone, and went back to my dinner. Steak, medium rare, cooked the way I like it. No arguments, no interruptions, no performance. That's what done really means. Not revenge, not forgetting, but peace. The kind that doesn't need an audience, an apology, or a closing line. Just you finally living the life you were too busy defending to enjoy.